Hello, I'm Sharon Reynolds, President and CEO of the Devmar family of companies, headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm also a board director for the Women Business Collaborative and the co-chair of the Advisory Council. I am a proud sponsor of the 2021 Women Business Collaborative Annual Summit. The WBC's focus on 9 action initiatives has a global impact on elevating women for change. Providing access to capital for entrepreneurs is paramount, while parity among women of color cannot be overlooked. Join us for an extraordinary summit, and let's make these changes faster together. Thank you.
Coming up next, the CEO Roundtable with the 2021 Excellence in Gender and Diversity Awardees.
Welcome, everyone, to the WBC CEO Awards for Excellence in Gender, Parity, and Diversity. On behalf of myself and Robert Reiss, we are excited and really honored to have this chance to recognize extraordinary CEOs who have demonstrated their commitment and executive leadership to make gender parity and diversity a reality. And today we're really going to explore that a little further, but we congratulate our CEOs that have joined us today, and we're looking forward to having a rich dialogue to learn more from them around their leadership, their successful practices, and to really exemplify themselves as a role model for so many CEOs and organizations for really creating history at such an important moment for gender parity and diversity. And now I'm going to turn it over to my dear colleague, Robert Reiss, who will really talk about the why for gender parity and diversity. Robert?
Thank you, Becky. And of course, why is at the systemic core of practically every great movement. So we are going to hear the personal side of the why from each of the 3 CEOs. Let's start off with Tricia Griffith, CEO of Progressive.
Thank you, Robert. At Progressive, diversity, equity, and inclusion are fundamental to our core values. With so many acts of racism, homophobia, sexism, and xenophobia in our communities, this commitment is more important than ever. My diversity journey began in earnest when I led HR for Progressive starting in 2002. I was the only female on the executive team and really saw, and more importantly, felt firsthand how I held back on giving my opinions, my thoughts, and ideas because I lacked that confidence you get when the room is more balanced. I remember thinking that in this HR role, I was now the steward of our culture, and it needed to evolve, and that became my primary goal for every female at Progressive and still is today. So why is that? Diversity, equity, and inclusion allows us all to be able to bring our whole selves and really our best version of ourselves to work. After a lot of reflection, I had to admit that I hadn't been doing that up to that point in my career, likely based on the very male-dominated area of the company that I grew up with. I spent my first 15 years of my career in claims. And the fact that I didn't have peers who looked like me to run innovative ideas by and develop strategies for growth and success. That was the why on the personal side. It also happens to be very good for business results and just the right thing to do. As far as gender diversity, half of our customers are female, and it's critical to reflect the customers that we are so privileged to serve. It's also very important to have diversity objectives to hold leaders accountable. At Progressive, we're focused on 4 primary objectives, which have been in place for several years. The first one is to maintain a fair and inclusive work environment. At Progressive, we've committed to create an environment where people feel welcomed, valued, and respected. Number 2, we reflect the customers we serve. To serve our customers, we must understand them. We seek to be diverse in our employee demographics, experiences, and perspectives. 3, our leadership reflects the people they lead. Our goal is for our leaders to represent the people they lead, and we aspire to double the representation of people of color in senior leadership by the end of 2025, and hopefully many of those leaders are also female. And lastly, we contribute to our communities. We'll use Progressive's resources to support meaningful change in pursuit of equality. And finally, with the trifecta of having a female chairperson, a female CEO, and a female spokesperson, who you all know as Flo, we believe we're positioned for much continued success.
Thank you, Tricia. Jim Fitterling, the Chairman and CEO of Dow, the Why.
Thank you, Robert, for that introduction. It's great to be here and be part of the critical program with such recognized leaders. And I also want to congratulate WBC for continuing to push forward with this program and all the other initiatives to promote diversity and equity. It's a topic that's finally getting its full day in the sun, and clearly we're not where we want to be, but we're making progress. And through forums like this, we've at least begun to talk in earnest about where we are, where our successes are, our failures are, and what we can do together to move forward. I was fortunate in my Dow career to be introduced to diversity in a positive way early on. One of our oldest organizations in our employee resource groups is our Women's Innovation Network that was created now more than almost 30 years ago. And I joined the company as a sales rep in '84, and that was a fantastic introduction to the company and to our customers. But I quickly discovered that not everyone was the same, and not all companies shared the same values as Dow. There was one particular incident early in my sales career. We had a distributor, a large distributor in the southern US, I was based in Atlanta, who refused to work with one of my African-American colleagues. They wouldn't accept his meetings, they wouldn't take his calls. And I learned a pretty powerful lesson early on about principles and honor and values and your ability to demonstrate actions and not just words. Our zone vice president at the time, a white male in his late 50s, wouldn't even consider that we'd take that African-American sales rep off of that account. In fact, one Monday, we had a sales meeting every Monday morning, and one Monday after the weekly sales meeting, he took my colleague and he personally drove him 3 hours each way to our customer. And he sat down in front of the head of that large distributor in the Southeast and said, "Here's our Dow representative. If you want to work with us, you'll work with him, or you'll never get another shipment of Dow product ever." And it was a powerful episode. We didn't have social media back then, but I can tell you by the end of that day, everybody in that office knew where Dow stood, and they knew what we stood for. And if you fast forward 36 years, that episode still influences the way I think about the topic of inclusion and diversity, and especially as it comes to gender diversity as well as racial diversity. It set a strong tone about what a principled company looks like and acts like. And it isn't about talk. It's not about policies or vague HR statements that are on the wall. It's about taking action. It's about doing the hard work to create an inclusive culture, one what everybody wants to belong to every day, and one that everybody's proud of. And we've succeeded and we've failed at different points in our history, but I think most Dow people believe that we are on an achievable path forward on all these issues, including gender parity. It's about people leaders, and it's about role models like my first Dow Zone vice president, who refused to back down from those principles. And he led by example. Everybody's got their own example, and many of us have benefited from the allyship and the action of others, peers and leaders along the way. When we improve representation, gender, racial, ethnic representation, and it's important that we make progress on all of them. We're not just moving closer to parity or equity for any one of those groups. We're adding more role models to our ranks. We're increasing the diversity of experiences around our meeting tables, in our labs, in our manufacturing plants, and on our teams. And with that comes better ideas, more solutions, and an even greater opportunity for further progress. So that's why I'm so glad to be here today and to see the other role models who are also leading the charge on inclusion and diversity and equity issues, and to be part of the discussion on what's worked for us and how we move forward together to create greater diversity and equity.
Thank you, Jim. Now, Barbara Humpton, CEO, Siemens USA.
Thank you, Robert. And first, thank you to the Women Business Collaborative for this honor. It's incredible to be recognized among so many accomplished leaders, including Tricia and Jim. And it's incredible to work alongside accomplished female leaders on our US board and our leadership team. Something I've been sharing recently is the perspective that we're not going backward, we're going forward. And that applies to how we should flex every muscle to advance gender equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces. At Siemens, our focus is on supporting the vital industries and critical infrastructure that are the backbone of America's economy. We're a technology company, and we believe in technology's potential to shape a more just and equitable society. But to do that, we have to model the change we want to see. So we're championing two priorities that are important for connecting women with leadership opportunities throughout our organization. The first is empowering people to bring their full, authentic selves to work. And this speaks to the reality that we need people with diverse capabilities and perspectives to get the best results in our business, just as you've heard from Jim and Tricia. The second is fostering a growth mindset among our teams. We want our employees to believe they can learn new things, do new things, and meet the challenges ahead. That's how we'll pursue big ideas and solve big problems. But it's also how we can make it possible for everyone to realize their full potential. So I'll share just this one final point. It's not lost on me that the opportunity I have today to serve as CEO is because of the trails others have blazed before me. And here's the why. I see it as my responsibility to continue their progress so that things are better for the next generation. And so Siemens is a place where anyone can belong and grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So we've heard the whys. Now we're going to go into 4 questions that Becky and I will work with. And we're going to discuss the perspective of how the drivers of these are for gender equity and diversity. And the first one is on boards. So let's start back with you, Barbara. So you have 40,000 employees, and your board in the United States is really all women right now. Talk about your thinking. And I know that you actually handed from Judy Marks, a woman before you, brought you in as CEO.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic story. And it's really this simple. Who's got the best talent for the role that needs to be formed? It's really interesting that we have seen a team of experts rise to key roles within the Siemens Corporation, be it in our general counsel, our chief financial officer, our head of communications and external affairs. These are women who have really shown their capability to help us shape our future. And so it's been natural that they've risen to these leadership positions. In addition to our corporate board being all women, we have a U.S. leadership team, which comprises the key businesses that perform here in the U.S. As arms of their global businesses, as well as the major functions that serve these businesses in the U.S. And a full third of that leadership team is female today. And I think it reflects a larger trend, this idea of who can be a leader. It continues to change. I don't know about you all, but early in my career, what I heard was I wasn't exactly executive material, that I was different, I was unusual, too nice. But I knew deep down inside, I loved the work I was doing. I loved being part of a team and contributing. And I felt that I had something the business needed, even though I didn't fit the mold of executive management. So what I'm hoping for is that in our organization, we continue to see diverse styles and natural capabilities really come together around a shared purpose. We can be mission driven, and that this mutual respect for the expertise of each of us can pull us into high performing teams that accomplish more than we could do otherwise.
Thank you, Barbara. Jim, in asking you about the board at Dow, you have 27% women right now, and you're focused on the independent directors deeply. Talk about your thoughts.
Yeah, we have 11 board members, including myself. I'm the only management board representative. 55% of our board members are either gender or are racially diverse. And that's been an intentional target that we've driven. And I think, like Barbara mentioned, inclusion diversity begins at the top, and many things where we're trying to govern, the tone gets set at the top. And in this case, it gets set with our board, and our board has always been active and pushing. In fact, for many years, our board was more diverse than our management team at the company. It's important for that reason. You know, it also gives us a more effective and comprehensive understanding of some of the complex risks and the issues that face a multinational corporation. And it helps the company foster a more inclusive and innovative corporate culture. The board pushes the management to have and create an environment where everybody feels welcome in the company. And it's our highest level of governance in the company. It's our most public and visible reflection of our company to our shareholders. So it's important that our employees and all of our stakeholders can clearly see the representation at our board and the representation down through the organization, starting at the very top. And I think we've all seen studies for many years that a company's financial performance and the connection between diversity and the financial performance is linked. McKinsey's report in 2020 on why diversity matters said that diverse companies are 36% more likely to have above average financial performance. And Tricia mentioned it earlier. If you're going to collaborate with customers and you're going to be innovative, you have to have a lot of diverse perspectives and viewpoints. And in order to do that, you need people who look different and act different and bring their whole selves to work every day. We've had a lot of discussions on refreshing the board membership with emphasis on diverse experience as well as diverse racial and gender backgrounds. We've appointed 4 new directors in 2020 and 2021. And right now we're first quartile for board diversity among our peers. And at our management team, we've got a target to get to 50-50 parity by 2025. And we're well on our way to do that. So we're very committed, and it's starting to have an impact throughout the entire organization. And I think you'll continue to see more progress from Dow.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So now, Tricia, let's talk about the board. And you're right. I left out Flo, which is our beloved person. But you've really achieved gender parity, and you have 45% of the board are women, and your chair as well is women. And we're waiting for the day when it just becomes standardly called chair, no longer chairman. Talk about the process you went through to get there.
Absolutely. And there's 2 things. Jim said something about being intentional. That is number 1. And Barbara said, we're not going back. And that is also so evident in how we think about going forward. And when you think about the history of board composition, a lot of it was who you knew. And if you were a CEO, you were likely male, likely white. And those were the people you worked with. And you knew that person did a nice job, and so you would nominate them for another board. And that is sort of how it got exacerbated. And the problem is, when I was head of HR, head of claims, chief operating officer, really big jobs in a billion, multi-20, $40 billion company, I was trying to get on a board. I thought that would be really great to set me up to understand if I could compete for the CEO role. And my predecessor at the time was having me work with all the search firms. I have a business background. And so he thought this was his perfect package for a board member. No one called me. Now, the only reason I got on a board before I was the CEO was because a prior board member, Progressive, who had retired, had me on his board because he saw my leadership skills. And that was really because I didn't have that CEO, those 3 letters after my name. And so I think we've really changed. And so when I had the opportunity, when I got the CEO role in 2016, I knew I was going to be intentional and leverage retirements and openings to be able to make sure that we evolved. And it's so outwardly focused that also from the employee base at Progressive, they see that we took action. And so first and foremost, I talked to Lawton, my chairwoman, and said, as the chair of the nominating and governance committee, can we do this search together? Because I think it's really important for both skills as well as who will be added to your board to actually, really have action plans around that. So we started our search and have added 3 board members that are female. So now we have 12 board members, including myself. 6 are female, 6 are male. The first one, who all of you know, I'm not going to name all of them, but Pam Craig has been great. And she had she was a CFO of Accenture, great, obviously financial acumen. And then we started searching out for different types of skills. And we did use a search firm at one point and added a young, bright, tech-savvy African-American woman who knows Silicon Valley, brings so many ideas to the table. And then we were sort of full. And you can always have a range of 12 to 14 or 10 to 14 board members. And we were full. But another board member who knew I was thinking about this and really caring deeply about making sure we reflected my employee base and our customer base, met a woman at an NACD conference, and he said, I met her in the elevator. I think you'd really like her, Tricia. And she happens to be a retired 3rd-star admiral in the Navy that knows Russian, is a cyber expert. Who would not want a cyber expert on their board? So I flew down to Florida, met her, and added her to the board. So my reason for telling that story is, let's look a little bit deeper in organizations. There are some brilliant women and people of color all around our organizations that can really be additive to your board. And that's really what I wanted to make sure to have happen. And then, of course, we're doing the same thing with Progressive as we fill the top of the funnel, and we're not as good. I have opportunities, as I have a few retirements coming up, to continue to change the look of my board as well, from both a gender and ethnicity perspective. And again, it takes time. You've got to do it in the right way. You can't just say, I'm going to add women or people of color, because that will degrade the system. It has to be people that are additive, intentional, and people, when they know you're going to take action when you have the opportunity, they believe in you and they know that it'll take time. So I'm excited about the future and excited about the fact that we're having this conversation. And like Barbara said, we're not going back. We're moving forward, doing it in the right way.
And this is great. As you're listening in the audience, well over 1,000, I think close to 2,000 people. The one thing that I really see in Tricia, Jim, Barbara, passion. You are committed and you're passionate about this. And that's how we're moving this whole movement forward. Now we're going to move on from speaking about the board into the management and leadership C-suite. And Becky, all yours.
Thank you, Robert. And the board of directors is so important, because what we're going to be talking about the rest of this program, the board can have so much influence and drive commitment within the organization. And so congratulations to all of you for putting that effort into your board of directors. But we are going to talk now about the C-suite, about the pipeline around driving talent. And post-COVID, the dynamics have really changed to many degrees. And so we've had to really sharpen our pencil around that, but just so important around gender parity and diversity. Tricia, let me just start off with you. I believe that your workforce is 56% women. So that's a pretty robust pipeline. Could you just share with us, what have been some bold moves? You've given us a little color around the board of directors, but could you please share with us what you think needs to happen and what you've done, and what has been some bold things you've done around your leadership to really accomplish that, and advice you have for others?
Yeah, I think you really need to make sure you make investments. So what happens is you can hire 50, 55% females, but as they move up in the ranks, it becomes more difficult, whether it becomes they're the fact that they, are the primary childcare. And we're seeing that in the pandemic. And one thing I think all three of us and every CEO needs to think about is what happens in the workforce as we come out of the pandemic. As more people work from home or in a hybrid situation, how do you lift up and elevate the people that may not be walking the halls every day? So that's probably for another day, but we started investing in programs about 10 years ago to elevate women and people of color into that first rung of leadership. And then we started formulating programs. We have what we call a multicultural leadership development program, where you apply for it and we give a cohort of about 20 people a real great meaty business problem to solve. And then they present to us. And the people that go through that program are about 40% more likely then to get a promotion. So we saw that working. And so now we've doubled down on that investment. And then you have to do things like we've all been talking about intentionally. So probably 3 years ago, we looked at sort of maybe 2 rungs under my team and said, wow, there's some great women there, but there aren't any roles opening up. So we do intentional swaps. We swapped out 7 people, and the majority of them were women, gave them jobs in totally different functional areas of the company. And by the way, they're all doing extraordinarily successful. And in fact, since then, a couple of them have gotten promoted. One is actually working for me now, running our $6 billion commercial lines organization. So again, investments, intentional. You have to be talking about this all the time. You have to paint a picture for the whole organization so they see the value in it, that they understand, wow, when this happened, we actually did, grow faster than our competitors. And we're continuing on that trajectory. And so again, using that, and we have employee resource groups to sort of boost that. It really is about using it like you do any other business plan, and because it's as important. And so that's what we've been doing really for the last 10 years, probably a little bit before then. And I would say we've ramped it up substantially in the last 5 years. And that's what excites me, because it really is about that momentum, and you start to see these leaders and you're like, they're going to be the next, name the job. And so that's our business plan. I talked about some of our objectives. We hadn't until last year had numerical objectives or goals to get to a certain place with women and people of color. And I realized that we couldn't just keep doing the same thing. We had to put objectives out just like we do our financial objectives. And then people think of it differently. And you know what? I think, and I believe, and I talk to progressive people all over, 45,000 people, they love it because they see the fact that it is good business.
Absolutely. Tricia, and thank you for that. Jim, I know you have worked on talent, built out a global talent team now since you've been in the executive leadership role at Dow, and congratulations for that. And as Tricia said, and all of us, there is and we know a really important business case around talent. But let's talk about pipeline and driving that talent. What are some of the things that you feel good about that Dow has accomplished, and any specific areas, practices that you've been able to employ that have really driven that success?
Yeah, thank you. And just picking up a little bit from where Tricia left off, we just last board meeting reviewed our succession plans with the comp and leadership development team, and I was happy to see, we've got a succession pipeline that's more than 40% female in the company. And just to give you a perspective, our average representation is a little over 30, and in the manufacturing ranks, it's much, much lower than that. So we've done a lot to really move up the management pipeline talent to over 40, between 40 and 50%. And obviously, our goal is to get that at gender parity. And so I feel good about the progress we've made. We've been intentional about putting inclusion and diversity metrics into our people leaders performance awards, our annual performance awards, and we have specific targets that we want to achieve there. In 2020, we started with the top 300 people leaders in Dow just to test how it worked. And this year, it's all people leaders in Dow globally. And that's having a big impact on how things have been moving forward. We now hire at parity into our salaried positions. So we're at parity today in salaried positions. And we just, in the last couple of months, have announced some specific hiring managers with the intention to hire females into the manufacturing workforce. Also, we have to create the right environment for them to succeed in that area. A lot of women, I think, opt out of the manufacturing workforce because they don't think they fit. But there are many, many jobs in that workforce that should be open to them. And I think you've got to make those introductions and you've got to make those connections to make that work. We also put a lot of effort on coaches and sponsors and mentors for the women in the organization. Ernst & Young is a company that we work with, and through our involvement with them and organizations like Catalyst, we use the Ernst & Young Power Up program for women and also sometimes for men to recognize, behaviors that are holding them back and building behaviors that will help us to move forward. We've had more than 1,000 women and 300 men around the world participate so far in Power Up, and it's making an impact. And then there's a program which we have called MARC, M-A-R-C, Men Advocating Real Change, in partnership with Catalyst. And we work with them on engaging men as allies, much like the story I told at the beginning, how a mature white male was the one that intervened and really stood up for racial diversity in the company. Networking is important. Our Women's Innovation Network, one of the challenges we hear from women all the time is, and we see from leaders when they're going to hire is, well, I don't know somebody, and that becomes an excuse for not selecting diverse talent into a role. And so we put an intentional networking program in to make women in our organization more visible across the company. And in my view, we're just taking away that excuse that you don't know somebody. That's not going to be acceptable. And then global hiring standards have changed tremendously. In 2020, we set requirements for job postings. We require diverse candidate slates for every job and diverse interview teams. So not just the candidate slates, but the interview teams. And we have the systems in place to be able to monitor that and track that. And I think Tricia made a comment about the pandemic and the impact that it's had. I think we hear a lot of stories about women being under stress through the pandemic and hoping to leave and thinking about leaving organizations. And I would encourage them to think just the opposite. I think a lot of things changed during the pandemic that long-term are going to be very positive for women in the workforce. We're addressing things that have always been a challenge around flexibility and juggling the demands of home and work. And I think we're in a much better place today coming out of the pandemic to be more flexible in how we allow people to use their time freely, allow them to be more productive, allow them to juggle the demands that they have. So I would just make a plea to women who are in the workforce. This isn't the time to opt out. I think we're on the threshold of some things that need to be more ingrained in the way we do work that will help women. They're taking hold right now.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I heard two words here. I think one is that you've really driven accountability within the organization. Barbara, I know you've done a lot of work around pipeline. And I will say to note that you, as well as your previous CEO, are women, have been women. So congratulations to that, because I think when we see that accomplishment of women who are CEOs, there's more of I think it's possible. We can do this, right? So congratulations to that. But your thoughts, your leadership has made a difference within Siemens USA around pipeline and talent. Tell us some of the things that you're excited about, that you feel good about in terms of the things you've put in place at Siemens.
Yeah, and I'm delighted that the word intentional keeps coming up, because really this is the point. We have to have an end in mind. And at Siemens, we are a company of engineers. And so it's natural for us to look at the whole system and ask ourselves, hey, if this is our intent, what do we have to do to get there? And so I'll build on Tricia and Jim's comments with maybe, reaching further back in time in that pipeline. Think about STEM and where an interest in STEM is first ignited. And so at the Siemens Foundation, we've spent over $130 million on STEM programs in K through 12. And then you start to look further, closer to that point of employment, and you say, well, talent exists everywhere. How am I going to find the diverse candidates that are going to really power our future? And so we've been building career pathways much more broadly than just traditional four-year degrees. We've been, through the Siemens Foundation, working on youth apprenticeships so that we get people started earlier, getting interested in a manufacturing career. But then you think about other non-traditional ways to bring candidates into our workforce. And recently we partnered with the HBCU Partnership Challenge, getting a more diverse population of interns into our pipeline. And then for mid-career, we've reached out to organizations like Boss Maker and Fairy God Boss, who are helping us to be introduced to women who might not be aware that they can enter this field mid-career. So really, I think that as we think about fostering more avenues for greater engagement, more connection points for women who might be interested in joining our team, then yes, we can, as we bring them in, have them join our ERGs, have them recognize that they do belong here. All of that is key. And so, this pipeline is really about helping people believe anything's possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Barbara. And I think one of the things we tend to focus on or used to is the folks that are ready now. And that's not always the pipeline. We need to really build and address those leaky pipes and create those bridges for people to come on naturally, right? And feel like they're valued early on. So thank you for that. I want to leave just a few more minutes just here in our conversation around C-suite, right? So that's always been a challenge. We're making progress. And however, we have more to go. So tell us a little more about the C-suite. What are your thoughts? Perhaps what is that sort of obstacle, and what do organizations need to do to open up those pathways for us to get more diversity and women to onboard into those roles and to be successful? I'm going to really just turn it over to Tricia. If you could just comment on that first, and then we'll go to Jim and Barbara.
Absolutely. One of the things that I have done is I tell my story. So I was in 2001, 2002, the highest ranking female in claims. And I sort of thought in my head, that's where I would end. I grew up there. That's what I would do. And our head of HR came up, and I don't have any HR experience. My predecessor was looking externally. I thought that was good because we didn't have a lot around diversity and inclusion. We didn't have a lot around metrics. I'm a business person, so I was watching who he would take from the outside. He ended up not finding anyone, and he opened it up internally. So now I'm watching internally, never thinking I should go for it or I could go for it. How presumptuous of me with marketing degree and only claims experience to go for the head HR job. And so again, I'm watching him and watching the people that are going for it. And then people started to call me, people I'd worked with, around, and the calls would go like this. Tricia, you've got to go for that job. You love metrics, you love diversity, you love culture. That would be a perfect job for you. And I would say, thanks, that's great, but I would never, that would just be embarrassing to actually call the CEO who I'd met once. Until I had a woman that I'd worked, with for many years, and she called me about 3 or 4 times and finally said, you're really shortcutting yourself. Why don't you start with this? Why don't you have a lunch with him and kind of tell me what you've been telling me for the last 5 years of how you think the job should be? And that seemed that bite-sized piece seemed a little bit more, in my style. So met with the CEO, and it was pretty empowering because I had a job I loved and I knew I wasn't going to get this job. So I laid all my cards on the table. And in the end, I got that job. And the reason I tell that story internally and externally to Progressive was shame on me for not seeing in myself what she and like I probably had 7 other people who called me to tell me that. I had kind of put myself in that box. There's that Hewlett-Packard study that was done so many years ago that females don't go for a job unless they have 100% of the qualifications and males have 60%. And I was right there. I told this story of myself that I couldn't do that job. And, you know, for me, it was, it's the confidence and having people lift you up and say, why aren't you doing this? We're all watching you from afar and we're saying you can do this. So for me, it's telling the story and paying it forward. Just recently, one of the females that was in the swap I talked about had already gotten her 2nd job since then. So she's moving up and we're making bets on her because she's really smart and really just a great person and follows our values. Another job came open and it was probably sooner than practical, but I saw her in that role. And I asked the hiring person, could I call her just to kind of, she's not going for it. And I don't know why, because I kept thinking to myself, I called her, she was at home and said, I think that'd be really hard to do during a pandemic. I'm like, why? And I kept saying, why? And she said, I kind of have imposter syndrome. I don't know that I could do that. It's such a big job. And she went through all these excuses. And I said, I am not going to be the hiring manager, but I don't know why you don't put yourself out there. And she said, you know what, let me think about it. Long and short, she ended up putting herself out there, ended up getting that job. And so it's my role to talk to those women, tell them my story, be open about my insecurities, because I think once you get that CEO role, people look at you and they're like, oh, they're so confident. They have it all made. We all have the same insecurities that everyone has. And if you can be authentic and be vulnerable, then I think people also feel like they can too. And we push them to be their best versions of themselves.
Yeah. So Jim, tell us more about C-Suite on your end, and what do you think needs to happen? What are some of the things that you're doing at Dow to really make that difference?
I think there was some discussion earlier about board memberships and representation. Historically, the only person in Dow that would serve on an outside board would be the CEO. And when I came in, I had quite a bit of discussion with the comp committee and said, look, I think we need to expand that. As I was trying to get more diverse talent onto my board, if I'm looking for female talent and the requirement is they have to be a CEO or a CFO, that pipeline is pretty thin. And so, I said, look, I'm getting calls all the time, seeing if my people are interested in sitting on a board. And obviously, it's hard to run your business and serve on more than one board. So we said, look, at my discretion, we can have people on my leadership team serve on an outside board. And we have to work out, obviously, the timing. They have to put their Dow priorities first. But I think that's helped in a couple of areas. It gets experience for the women that serve on those outside boards. And it gives them a perspective. I could talk all day long, but it just gives them a perspective that they can never get in a discussion with me, which is understanding what the role of the board is, seeing the role of the CEO from a different perspective, understanding the difference between running a corporation and running a business P&L and all the things that you have to deal with. And that, to me, has opened a lot of doors. And I think it's made us more appreciated for doing that, where I might run the risk of losing those candidates. Now they're motivated about what they're doing. They're getting a different perspective. They're bringing that back into their own Dow work, and people in the organization see that. So I think it's a real positive. And I think once you make a move like that, it builds on itself.
I think you're right, Jim. I think one of the biggest obstacles, I think, based on the research, is women don't have the access or visibility to P&Ls, to operational sort of opportunities. So giving them that environmental business context really expands their aperture, and I think just really sets them up for success, right? And that greater confidence in in the organization. So great work on that, great perspective. And Barbara, I'll turn it over to you to kind of pull in the last piece of the conversation on any words of advice or things that obviously you have women in your C-suite, right? Your two last CEOs have been women. What advice do you have?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about the candidates, but let's turn the lens around and examine our own motivations. The best advice I can give is get clear on what are the capabilities and skills you're looking for in that executive at this moment in time. And let me give you an example. We have a startup within our corporation, a new consulting firm. And in the US, it's a tiny team, and we really need to get this startup rocking and rolling. And so the question was, who should we look to be the CEO of Siemens Advanta US? And you know what we found? The lawyer for the global consulting firm had actually come to Siemens from a startup herself and had the perfect experience, the perfect qualifications to lead this team here in the US to growth. So we've just appointed Rainey Shea as the CEO of Siemens Advanta US, and she's the right person at the right time.
Excellent, excellent. And I think you made a really important part is know what you're looking for, have objective criterion that is for everyone, right? Versus taking that subjective lens or that subjective view. So really, really important there. Tricia, I just wanted to wrap up here and circle back with you on the ERGs. I mean, you've had a lens here around people being the CHRO for Progressive and then moving into the CEO role. But you, under your executive leadership, have created 9 ERGs across the organization. And I heard you share that it's embedded in our the DNA and the culture of the organization. That was notable for me. Tell me more about, I think it's called Networked Women, and to share for the sort of knowledge of other organizations here, how have you created and leveraged these ERGs to be of value, not only for the individuals that are in it, but for Progressive as well?
Absolutely. So it's Network of Empowerment of Women. And that was, I think, the third one we started. And I'll tell you why, because when I first started thinking about this 2002, 2003, I formed a team of women to talk about it. And right away, I just don't think we were ready for it, whether it was Progressive or society, because it felt like, okay, here's Tricia, the first female CEO, and then a group of women, a very small group because there wasn't that many to choose from, making this sort of exclusive group. And of course, the whole premise of ERGs are around inclusivity, being the verb, now, the noun being diversity. And so we started new sometime after we started the first two. And it was really based on me doing a lot of research around how important it was for people to talk with others like themselves. And of course, it is inclusive. So you want people from around the whole organization so you can actually stand in the shoes of someone else. And so whenever I talk to every new hire class, and we've been hiring thousands of people, I talk about you join one, join two. But when you go back to employee resource group, it has to be about, is there a demographic that you believe can be additive to have a mission around an ERG? And the first one I started was from a conversation I had a Monday morning, came into the office, a good friend of mine was there. And I said, how was your weekend? And he said, I hate that question. I said, oh, kind of Monday scaries. And he said, no, a little bit of history. He's gay, was out to me, but not out to other people within Progressive. And he said, every time people ask me that, I feel like I'm lying, because if I had a date, I can't really say that. So I always say, went out with friends. And I was devastated because I have known him forever. He's still here. I tell that story with his name within Progressive because he loves it. And that's when I started LGBTQ+. And because I kept thinking, he cannot be the best version of himself if he tells little white lies about what's a really important part of his life and who he is. And so that's how I think about ERGs. They have been more important than ever in this last year and a half. The Progressive African American Network has helped me maneuver my communications after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and making sure that they knew how important it was for leaders to reach out to say, how are you? We have a disabilities network. I think most people think of disabilities as physical disabilities. But within this last 2 years, there have been a lot that we've needed to invest in around mental health, and that's been important. Lastly, and we've got a bunch, I could talk about ERGs forever. We have 18,000 members within Progressive, but our Asian American network, when I communicated with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I didn't communicate as strongly when the murders happened and the whole xenophobia around the pandemic, and they called me out for it. And I had a session with their board and they said, we need more of you and here's what we need. And I love the fact that they could come to me and say that. And you can always make excuses of this, and this. All I said was, I'm sorry, you're right. Let me work on that. Can you help me? And that's what ERGs do. They make us better leaders. They make us better people, and they make you be able to say, I never saw the world like that. And so to me, they're 9 strong. We work not only within Progressive, but within our communities. Our veterans program, we give 100 cars away each November during Veterans Day to needy veterans. And it's just a really great way to connect with your employee base. The people that are members of the ERG stay longer, they're happier, they're more engaged, and they're promoted more quickly. And so to me, this is something that started with some seeds way back when and has proven to be really successful. And whenever I talk externally or to other companies, I talk about that's a good way to start your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Yeah, great conversation. And now, probably the thing I like to hear more than anything is from CEOs, because it's a core part of your job, is vision. So from each of you, you just have like a minute or a little more to talk about when we want to create equal pay, equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. That's the mission for WBC, and imagine me for choking up on that word. But what is your vision of what can happen in the workplace? So let's start off with Barbara.
Robert, thanks. I'm gonna go back to Tricia's story, because this is a piece of advice I give to people all the time. When asked about career advancement, I often tell people, raise your hand. What that means is be confident, raise your hand, and express your interest for an opportunity, no matter your gender. But even more, to those who are hiring, my charge to them is to remain open, be objective, consider the qualities that you're looking for, no matter what gender the candidate may have. If we do this, we're going to find we're tapping into the very best talent the world has to offer.
Inspiring. Tricia, your vision.
I feel like Barbara said it well. I think it has to be around authentic allyship and making sure that we lift other people up, whether it's men, women, and any ethnicity, et cetera, all the things we talked about, to eye the people and teach your leadership to do that. All of us are receiving this award, and by the way, it's a huge honor, but it's never lost on me that it takes leaders in our entire organization to embrace this and want to do this and know that that's the right thing to do. And that's really our primary job. And I'm just so glad that we're having this conversation and can't wait to continue it. And I'm an honor to be considered with both Jim and Barbara with this award. So thank you.
Absolutely. Jim, to wrap it up, your vision.
The reason that I focus so much on inclusion and diversity is I think that more than ESG or innovation or building a new plant or some new process, the issue of inclusion and diversity is critical to remaking our workforce, bringing in new talent, and it's going to be what defines the success for our organization in the coming decades. Inclusion and diversity really sets the tone for our culture. And internally, we live every day. The culture eats strategy for lunch every day. And so we couldn't do it without the right people, and inclusion and diversity allows them to come here and be themselves.
And that's what we're trying to do, get people to bring their whole selves to work, build the great organizations, and improve the world with this. So now let's have our summary from Jose Zelstra, and tell us where we go from here. and what we learned.
Well, thank you all for such an inspiring session. It's hard to take in all this great information and learning. But I really want to start with some common themes that each one of you shared. And that's really about we are going forward, not backwards. So that was a common theme that each one of you really was dedicated to. And the second common theme, I think, was around intentionality and the importance of that. Whether it's intentional goals, 50-50 gender parity, we heard from Jim, a Dow, or doubling leaders of color, a progressive by 2025. But also intentionality around, keeping yourselves and your organization, especially your leaders, accountable, whether it's incorporating inclusion and diversity metrics in the performance of its leaders. The other thing I heard was, really creative programs, role swaps. I really like that. Progressive. If there's not an opening, how are you doing creative ways to expand the skill set of your leaders? So when there is an opening, that they bring, even additional skills than they would have had otherwise. And then around leadership and really the importance of leadership as role models and setting the tone for the organizations, and empowering people to bring their whole selves to work. And I think the importance of that is just, transparency, whether it's leadership on the board or leadership in the C-suite, and the importance of being transparent, both for shareholders as well as customers, but also employees who are looking, for future roles in the organizations. And the other thing I learned was, who can be a leader, can change over time. And an individual that you may not have tapped for a future leader may have the skill sets that you didn't expect and can be put in some of those leadership roles. And I love the supplier diversity conversation and the amount as well as the number of suppliers that are diverse, and I like that in Siemens, the supplier diversity program, that you have that for 6,000 small and diverse organizations, and that they're really growing with the organization as well, a real partnership there. And just in closing, and some of the quotes, if I got it right, if a company doesn't bring value to society, it should not exist. Another quote was, the CEO is the steward of the culture, and the culture eats strategy for lunch. And what I really appreciated too, that there are some positive results out of this pandemic, especially for working moms who have been trying to, fight for flexibility in their work. And I think we've come to a place where that's now a reality, and that's a good thing. So I want to end that on a good note. So thank you all for sharing such great learnings.